So let's just do hair real quick. I'll just show you, that way you'll see the process one more time. It's the same process as clothing actually, but you know, it's good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load Genesis 3 male once again. And I've got an OBJ of hair. So I'm just going to load that in. If I didn't mention it before, OBJ is our format of preference for bringing in mesh, exporting mesh out. MorphLoader Pro only uses OBJs, so you have to do OBJ. You can work with FBX if you want, but it's not as reliable as OBJ. So I would recommend just sticking with OBJ. Most applications support it, so it's the way to go. So I've got this hair here. All right, so again, if I move this around, you can see the hair is not following. And what we do is we run that transfer utility, setting Genesis 3 male to the source, the hair as the target, and I'm going to set short hair as my template. And this again, like I mentioned, it cuts out a lot of the bones that are in the face and head. I'm not sure if the ear bones stay in or not, but it just kind of clears out as many bones as it can. And hit accept, and now the hair will follow as we go. And so really, like if I was setting up hair, I would be almost done at this point, right? I mean, I can test out some morphs and see how they're doing, but the rigging portion of it is pretty much done, because if it's short hair like this, it usually comes through really well. And I don't know if you guys even care to see how to save it, but
yes, yeah,
you do? Seems like a common question that comes up. So first I'm just going to check here and make sure. I'm going to hide those properties. I just want to make sure that it's bending correctly. So we usually just check, and okay, yeah, it kind of scrunches like your head would if you had some fat back there. Probably is good. Okay, so it looks pretty good. And then we can actually check some morphs. And we'd be checking some head morphs because we don't really need to worry about the body. So we dial it up, and you can see it automatically is projecting this Gianni head morph on there. And it seems to be pretty good. Ivan hardly changes at all. Wow. Same with this Lee character. So we just run through the morphs, just make sure they're working. And if you want to clean it up, you can. Once it's good,
when we would get bug reports on here, one of the things that I would see is it doesn't
there's another way of setting up hair that people like to do, and it's simpler than this. Instead of using transfer utility, they just bring in the OBJ and then save it out. And then it doesn't actually, they parent it to that head bone on the figure. And so it doesn't really follow things. So if you apply a morph, the prop version of the hair will not follow that. And so what they'll do is they'll include a bunch of morphs on the hair that you have to go manually dial up.
Okay.
And if they don't support it, then you have to position it yourself and try to find a close match.
You'd be avoiding that by using
So if you do it like this with the transfer utility, so that it sets it up as what we call a figure. So basically how we define prop and figure is if it's a prop, it has no bones at all. And then if it's a figure, it does have bones. And in this case, it's going to have all the same bones that the figure it's following has. So you see it has a hip, abdomen, lower, upper. It goes all the way up the chain to the head. Basically every bone that might be needed, right? So it has some brows and ears, and so it has a bunch of bones. And if it has all that, we usually call it figure hair. And in Dev Studio, if you have a figure that's following another figure, so the hair is following the Genesis 3 male, then morphs will automatically apply. It'll automatically project to them, and if you dial up a morph and you already had that morph on the hair, for instance, then it would just dial it up on the hair instead of auto-projecting it. And then as you scale it or do anything else, it's going to follow as well. So most likely those guys are doing the old style where they don't have it set up as a figure, so it doesn't follow.
So that's not the preferred way to do it.
I don't think it's great for user experience. However, There are times where morphs get applied on the head and the hair doesn't follow very well. And so sometimes these guys use that prop hair as a way to get around that issue. It just doesn't follow at all. And so they don't feel like they have to support it. I don't know. It's a way of saying, okay, well, and a lot of times they'll include adjustment morphs on the prop hair. So they'll have like a left adjust out in and a right adjust out in back. And so they'll give you a bunch of options so that you can kind of piece together the look without having it get the distorted weirdness that might happen if you dial up, say, an alien head on here, where it would just totally get distorted like crazy. Or sometimes you'll dial up an ear morph. I don't know if I have any ear morphs on here. So I dial up the ear right there, and we actually made it so that doesn't project to your hair, so it wouldn't break. So I don't have an example of a morph that would break it, but there are plenty of morphs that will, and so that's one way they control it. So it's kind of debatable whether it's the right way or the wrong way to do it. I think it's probably better just to get as much of the morph as possible. But let's see. Oh, we're going to save it, right? Is that where we're at? So saving it's pretty simple. First of all, maybe you guys all do this already, but I've noticed a lot of artists don't do this. And that is when I'm working on a project, I like to set up a project directory for it. And so it's clean, because I hate saving my files out into a directory I already have mapped with a bunch of the content in it, and then when I want to give it to somebody else, I have to go and, okay, how do I piece all this together so I can give it to somebody, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I do it the easy way. I've got a folder here, I'll just say my project, and then select that folder, and now it's mapped right here, right? And then I'm just going to go save as. I have my hair selected, and I go save a figure prop asset. So what we're going to do is we're saving it. We do things, I don't know, every app has a different way of handling their assets, but we have we save out a front-facing file that a user will see in a library, and that's a .duf file. And then in a data folder that's hidden from the user, we write all the geometry, the rigging, the morphs, the UV maps, all that stuff. All that stuff gets written in this back end in the data folder where nobody's going to really look at it. And so because we scatter files like that, I was just showing how we usually set up a project folder so that our files will all be gathered in one area, so it's easier to zip up. So in this case, this is a Genesis 3 male hair, and I was just showing, let's see, that I'm in my project folder and I have to figure out where to save my hair. This is probably why people do save everything into their normal map directory, because, you know, how do you know what folder structure you're supposed to follow? So we actually want to create a folder structure that matches what I have up here, where it's a people, Genesis 3 male, hair, and then create a folder there for your project, and then put it in there. So that's kind of a pain. So so I don't forget it, I'm just going to drag this out so I can see the whole thing. All right. And then I'll save my hair under, I'm going to have to create that folder structure. Oops. See, I hit my trackpad here and it popped me up one. And we'll call this my hair. Okay. And we should be giving it an original name, but I'll just call it hair for now. Okay, and then it pops up a second dialog, and this dialog is going to say, all right, where do you want all those assets to be gathered? And it, by default, is picking the right place, so I don't have to touch this top one. And then my vendor name, you probably already filled this in because when Destudio first launches, it asks you for your vendor name and everything like that. But say Bob is my actual vendor. Oh, that's too many B's. Set my vendor name, my product name, and then the item name. So I know it's super tedious, but if you're building a product and it's, you know, my cool outfit and it comes with a shirt and pants and shoes and everything like that, right? Then my vendor name is Bob. My product name is going to be My Cool Outfit. And then my item name would be whatever item I'm saving out at this moment. My hair, if my hair is my only item, it kind of gets a little redundant if I'm calling product name my hair and then my item name my hair or whatever. I don't know. It seems repetitive, but it's necessary. Just, don't worry about it. You have to do it. And so I name it, and then I'm just going to leave everything here set by default. Okay, now if I just clear my scene, we're just going to start over and see if I can load this hair correctly. So I'll go under my project, and my folder structure is all there, and load the hair, and it applied to the figure. And if I drag around, yeah, so it fit to it. So the way follower items work, like hair and clothing, if you have a figure selected in your scene and you load that follower item, it automatically attaches to it and follows it. So the hair saved correctly, and everything's happy. Any questions about any of that? There are more details we can go into, but we don't need to. The groin does.
So try and keep things closer to the skin there.
Yeah.
Everything bunches up.
Yeah. So the best practice that people do, especially with the groin, because your legs are so close together there, is keep things as close to the surface of the skin as possible. And I've even seen where people, to minimize their work, they'll build, like this shirt, for instance, is pretty baggy. They'll make this a morph on their shirt, and then their mesh of the shirt that they load in to rig will actually be tighter, conformed to the skin, so that they'll rig that, and then they'll load this on as a morph and then dial up that morph, and then it works a lot better. Rather than going and projecting through the transfer utility to these wrinkles and all these things that are off the skin a bit. Like the arm right here. Hey, come on. Oh, I didn't set it up yet. All right, we're going to run transfer utility real quick. So my mail is the source. And we'll run this. Yeah, so it's definitely key that you model relative to the figure that you're attaching it to. Because if you bring it in and it's off a little bit and you have to translate it or whatever, when we run transfer utility, we toss all those transforms out. And so if the shirt was down by his feet, then now it's going to be down there again. And so it screws everything up. So making sure it's in the right spot is definitely key. And if we go and we just bend this, you can see there's some crumpling there. In a morph. Yeah. If you do that, you can often have better results. Also, another reason that can be good is maybe your base mesh is going to be symmetrical, and that'll make it so you only have to do half the work, right? Because if it's symmetrical, then I can fix the weights on one side and have it mirror to the other side. But if my mesh is all asymmetrical, then I have to do all the work twice, right? So sometimes people will go and they'll have their clothing as symmetrical as possible as their base, and then they will run it through transfer utility and clean up all the morphs, or clean up all the weights and everything, and then load in their morph that makes it asymmetrical, wrinkles and whatever else. So that's a cheat thing that people like to do, in addition to keeping it close to the surface and then morphing it out from there. So here, you can see maybe a little bit, it's collapsing a little bit here. It's got kind of a rough edge. And so you would want to go in and smooth those weights. But first, before I would do that, is I'm going to look at, here. I'm going to look at this shirt, and you can see, I'm going to show hidden properties real quick and go to currently used. And I don't know if you can see this, but up here I've got two morphs that are applying JCMs. We talked about corrective morphs, right? There are corrective morphs that are applying on here. Before I clean up weights, I usually like just zero anything that's dialed on, just to see if the morph is the problem. And a lot of times we'll actually have those turned off while we clean up the weights. And if you're interested in dealing with that, let me know, because there are actually some easier ways to turn these off for the rigging process. But just not going to cover them right now. But in this case, let's just pretend that the morphs are fine, and we just want to clean up the weights there. So we're going to go. Oh, if you're new to Daz Studio, one of the things you have to do if you want to get the tools like I've got it set up is you go under this window menu under Workspace, and you select a layout. And in my case, I have my own custom one, but it's based on City Limits. So City Limits Lite is the default, and it doesn't have all these extra content creator tools showing up in the toolbars. And so if you go to City Limits, then that'll put these up here and give you the shortcuts to the transfer utility and some of those other tools as well, Morphloader Pro. So it's a little easier than having to go to the edit menu every time. So I've got the weight tool, and if I just right click on the spot that I want to work on, it'll say right shoulder bend. I just need to check and see which one that's selected. So normally, I know this, if you're a beginner to Daz Studio, it makes it harder to learn this. Normally our follower content is set up, so if I click on the shirt right here, it actually selects through to the figure it's fit to. Because most of the time, if I'm selecting the arm, I don't want to select the arm on the shirt and bend it. I actually want to select the figure itself and bend it so that the clothing follows. If I was selecting the Hawaiian shirt's arm and try to do it, then it gives me all the weird results, right? So most of the time you're selecting through. Well, when you're painting weights and fixing up your shirt, you don't want that, obviously. So you can right click on it and just right shoulder bend, and it'll actually select the shirt itself. And then there's a tool settings pane where you can see the weight maps, or you can see the options for your tool, and I've got the weight brush selected. And you can see here that got the weights showing. Red means it's weighted stronger, and blue means it's lighter, and yellow is barely any at all, and then everything else just means no weight. So you would go in here, and I've got my brush active, and I can hold down Control and click on here to smooth the weights, and that you can kind of just fix it up a little bit. No, kind of. Sorry. You can select geometry and then fill the weights. So basically, whatever you have selected, you can set a percentage that you want it to be. You can actually do that with the node weight brush. If I switch here to the facet selection, and I can select some faces here, and then I can right click and say weight editing fill selected, and say I want these filled at 100%. And so you can do that, and then but the smooth tool is really nice. Yeah, well, yeah, it depends on what you're doing, because if you had a button or something on there and it's getting distorted, you might want to fill that to a value so it's not distorting, and then maybe smooth a little bit after that. Not yet. I know that we are working on that pipeline so that people aren't forced to learn our tools. They could go and do it in another application, then bring it in. So I just don't know how far out we are on that one. Okay. But I know that I've heard multiple times that that's the goal.
They're saying for more was that they wanted it.
Right. That's the emphasis there. That's where it's coming from, is because Morph, we don't want everybody to have to learn Daz Studio if they're already Maya or 3D Studio Max experts. Yeah, they could bypass Daz Studio and just build it all in there.
And just to be clear, since we're talking about morphs, just now when you were using the word morph, you were talking about morph3d.com.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yes, morph3d.com. We kind of use those mixed together. So does everybody know we have the daz3d.com and then the morph3d.com, and the morph3d site is focused on game content or different markets than just our Daz Studio market. So the format is FBX over there, so you can load that into any application that supports that. Just a real quick, you were asking about setting a percentage on things. Just to show you really quickly, I have geometry selected, right? I filled it to 100%, but let's just, actually let's do that. It's filled to 100%, but now it's not matching up how everything around it is moving, right? So I'm just going to show you some other options under weight editing. You have your fill selected, which is what I did, where you can set a percentage. You can smooth the selected geometry. So I can say, okay, well, I've got this geometry set up. These values, I have no idea what they mean. I know percentage, 100% is a lot stronger than 0%. I don't know what it correlates to. And then there are a number of iterations. So that's just how many times it's running the smoothing operation, right? So I don't know what these values mean. I usually do lower values and then accept that, and it'll look at its neighbors and kind of make it so it blends in with the neighbors. So a lot of times if you have a button and it's distorting funny when you bend, then I'll go through and I'll fill that button to a fixed value, and then I'll smooth it. And it'll look at its neighbors and go, okay, I'm going to follow these, and it'll smooth out the values a little bit. So that's handy. You can do that with a brush as well, though. The brush, you can see here, if you hold down Control and scroll, that'll give you different sizes. And I think, let's see, Shift and scroll does the middle one, and Alt and scroll does the outer ring. And that's just showing the fall off of the brush. If I just paint on here, that's painting. If I hold down Alt, it's subtracting weight, which I don't recommend ever doing. And then we have Control that smooths the weight. And it just looks at the neighboring points and says, okay, this one has a value of 30% on our shoulder bone. My value is 60. Let me normalize that out, and it'll kind of average those numbers. And so that's basically the process, is going through and finding problem areas. And a lot of the times all I'm doing is using a smooth brush. I'll just smooth it, and I'll just hold down Control and smooth it, and then go, oh, that's too much. Maybe I'll add a little bit more weight to it here, and then just smooth a little more. And it's just kind of an iterative process going through until you get it down. Our tools for painting weights aren't terribly complex. It's just that brush. And so it's relatively simple, but I'm pretty sure that other, like Maya and Max, I think they have some more advanced tools for painting weights that might be easier. So hopefully we get that ability someday where we can do that. There's a lot more that we go into in the weights, but I don't think we really want to go there. But that's what we do. We check each bone, bend it, see if there are any problems. If there are, fix them up. The groin is definitely one of the more problem areas because there's so much geometry tight there. So you have to go in there, and it takes a lot more effort usually. A kilt would be easy actually, because we have a template that already has all that rigging done for you. So you just use that template and you're good. So yeah, that's probably the better way to go. I highly recommend that. So that's kind of how you do follower content, and saving the shirt is going to be the same way you did your hair. You're going to just save it as a figure prop asset under the file menu. So not everybody does clothing or hair. So I thought I'd give you a little introduction. On how you do prop type stuff, environment things. Say I have a sword that I want to rig. Hinges? I'll get to a door. Yeah, we can do that if you want. So I'm just going to bring this in real quick. Rigging a prop is super simple. I brought this in, and if I go to my joint editor tool, you can already see I've got this red and green point there. That's my center point, my end point, which is just your beginning and end of a bone. So it has a bone already. If you're going, it's not really a bone. It's just a center and end point, and you can move those around. If you want to have bones where you actually have a hierarchy and everything, then you can convert it to a figure and then set those bones up. But this basically acts like a single bone, right? And you have full control over it. This sword, right now, you see the center and end points are just right there in the middle, and they're pretty useless. Like if I was going to rotate this sword, it's going to rotate around that point, which if I was going to put that in my hand, it would be totally useless. It would be so hard to position it all the time, right? So what is better, of course, would be to try to put this green point, the center point, where that hand would be grabbing it, so that at least you have a little easier time posing it. So in this case, you can go and position that right here and get that set up, but I'm going to be lazier than that. And I already rotated the sword so it's vertical. Sword vertical, here we go. Okay, so when that sword comes in, you can see my center point is down at the origin and my end point's at the tip. And now all I have to do is go and grab this center point and move it up kind of where the hand is going to be. And so now it's centered on my geometry and I'm done setting it up, and I could turn around and save it just like I saved the hair or whatever. Well, actually, before you would do that, you would want to memorize your rigging. Just, I don't know if it ever matters. The programmers tell me it matters, but I haven't found a case where it actually matters. I just don't know. So I just do it just to be good. But you memorize your figures rigging, your props rigging, and then you can save it out just like before. And then after that, the sword will always load in. I'm just going to save it really quick because then I can show you part 2. And this is not in a folder that I would actually be putting in because it's in my hair folder. But let's see. So if you work with Dev Studio, sometimes you'll notice that this area down here doesn't fill in with the content. So just click down in here and sometimes stuff will show up. I don't know. It's just a little bug that's there. But I load this sword in, and let's say I want to put it in someone's hand. This is pretty easy too. I'm going to load the mail, and ouch, it's got a sword going through him. So this sword, let's say I want it in the right hand. There's an option on your scene pane that's parent items in place. I'm going to turn that off. And then with this sword, you can right click on here and say, why is it not showing up? Alright, I can make it, I can move it to be a child of the hand. Okay, so I'm just going to navigate down here and chest upper, right color, drill all the way down to the hand. And if I drop it in the hand, it jumped up towards the hand. And then you can go in and position it so it fits. I'm going to be really imprecise here. Just kind of stick it there. And then maybe to help with this, I'm going to, on Genesis 3 male, I've got some pose controls for the hands here. Right hand grasp, and if we're lucky, we can actually use that for the sword. Kind of. We're going to pretend like I handcrafted a hand grasp. And let's just say that's good enough. Okay. And then we actually can just save, with this Genesis 3 male selected, you can save a wearable preset. And we'll call it sword in hand. And then you'll see it says, okay, you got the sword, you want to include that. And then you can actually save pose. And the pose information that we're saving is actually on the male, the hand grasping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check only all modified, and then let's just make sure this worked. Okay, so it's got, okay, and now if I accept this, then I can delete this sword and reset him, and then when I load the sword in hand, oh sorry, that's a hotkey, I was blind. So if you have the figure selected and you do Control-Shift-F, I think it also shows up here. Yeah, up here you can do it. Restore figure pose. So you saw that sword actually applied the pose as well. And then, so wearable presets, nice way to go with that. A lot of people do this wrong. I think they just come up with other creative ways to do it, but this is really super easy, right? We just did it in a few minutes, and it works well. So actually, that's why I checked that and said, here, we'll start over. That's why I checked that option to only do the modified, That way I can go and I can pose him let's see, where will he not be killing himself when I do this? Okay. So he's standing like this, and then a sword in hand, he gripped it, and then didn't modify anything else going on. Yep. So if you want to recline against the wall with the sword in your hand, you got it. And then often, you know, and this is just a dumb packaging thing, but a lot of times we'll also include that hand pose, because you see the wearable, loading that wearable, apply that pose, but later if I go and apply another pose, say this one, oh, my hand lost that grip going on, right? And so it would be nice to be able to go back and now apply my hand pose back on there so it puts it back on. And so that's what we'll do, is we'll make a hand pose that actually clears out everything else that's going on in the hand, but then applies the things that set it up so it'll hold it correctly. And that's, I don't know how many people actually do that. She tests a lot of content, but hopefully they do it, because that's best practice. Right. Yeah, because their feet are through the ground, right? Well, and that's the thing too, is I don't know how many people know it, but you know, if your figure is sticking through the ground, you can just go and right click on the parameters pane and move to floor, and that'll jump. And
Does that include like one of the shoes there?
yes,
Does it include the entire figure?
it'll do everything. They made it smart. So here I've got some deck shoes on here. It's not, you know, a great example, but let's see from the front view. You can see, well, they don't add enough on there. So, but if I popped it, you see it moved a little bit. But yeah, it will take the whole thing into account.
Based on the binding box, you know?
It is, yeah. So that's that. Now I'll show you maybe a slightly more complex setup, which is just, I'm going to load it in here and it's probably going to look like nothing. It's a wall. Okay. So here's a wall, and you can see a cutout there where a door is. So if you want to rig this, it's pretty simple. I'm just going to delete this. There's a, where is it? So I don't know where it is there. Maybe it's under Windows. Okay, it is. Under Window, Figure Setup, panes. It'll pop up this dialog here, and you can load in a geometry. And this is there are multiple ways to do this door thing, but I think this is the easiest way to go, so I'm going to do it this way. You just go and you add your geometry, and then select it, bring it in, and then when you drag and drop it over here on this side, it goes, okay, you had these face groups in this geometry. In this case, the default actually is nothing, so I'm going to delete that. But it gave me a wall and a door, because I actually, in my modeler, I set up my wall and I gave it a face group or a part, depends on what app you're in, what they call it, but I assigned the whole wall as the wall, and then the door piece as the door. And then you can drop it and say, well, I want the door to be a child of the wall, so wherever the wall moves, the door will go with it. All right. We have a concept of rotation order, and I hate to go too deep into that, but it's basically we can choose the order of which, you know, X, Y, or Z, which one goes first. Some apps do that, some don't. In this case, anything that's vertical, like a door with hinges, Y, Z, X is what you want to do. So I'm just going to do Y, Z, X, and then create my door, or create my wall with the door. All right. So here's my door, and if I rotate it, nothing happens yet, because all it did is it just created the bones. And then I get my weight brush, and then go to weight editing, fill by bone selection group, and now my door moves. Okay. So it just fully weighted it. It just said, okay, I already have these face groups assigned, the door, the wall. I'm just going to fill these to 100%, which is a good starting point most of the time. In the case of this door, the bone is positioned incorrectly. And so what we want to do is just put the bone in the right spot. So I'm going to go to top view, and you can see the border there. where the door starts, and I've got the right thing selected. And I'll go to the tool settings. I'm just going to move the X position of the door over to here. And if I had hinges, I'm just going to pretend I have hinges on the front. And then the end point is floating over there. It may or may not really matter, but just to be tidy, I'm going to move it because I don't want it to bug me. And then copy that. Okay, now that's where my door will rotate around. You can see now it moves. So pretty straightforward. And then at this stage, you would just be figuring out what limits you want to set on it, right? Your door doesn't want to go back through here. So you'd say, okay, well, 0 is my limit. So you can come into the parameter settings on that and set your minimum to 0. And then maybe your max is 90. And if I accept that, oops, I did it backwards. Oh, sorry. It's right here, this little gear icon on it. And so I'm going to pop this open, and I'm going to change the label to open, close, so it makes more sense. And I had it backwards, so my minimum will be -90 and my max will be 0. And then if I accept that, now it's called open, close, and now I have a door that swings just as far as I want it to. So you can do that for anything. If you had a robot and you had 50 moving parts on it, you go and group it all. You say, okay, this is hand, this is forearm, this is shoulder, whatever you want to name. And then when you bring that in through that figure setup dialog that I showed you, this thing here, you just go and set it up and say, okay, hip is the parent, and then abdomen is a child of that, and set up your hierarchy like that, and then bring that in, and it'll give you that initial starting point where everything's rigid, and then you just have to go and smooth things out where the bones blend in together. So it's just work. If you're in city limits, you have all the tools along here, and this is the joint editor tool. And then the tool settings pane is your friend. It has all the options for whatever tool is active. So for the joint editor, it has your positions, and you can see the values are actually white, right? And if they're white, that means you neglected to memorize the rigging, which I neglected to do. So once you're done, if you see their white things and you go, oh, whoops, I need to memorize it. And once I memorize that figure rigging, then it bakes it down as your new default settings so that it'll always restore back to that. Again, I don't know if it's all that important to do, but I've been told to do it, and I think in Dad Studio it doesn't really matter that much. Poser, I think, is what really complained about it. So we had to do it for that. So you set that up, and it's just a matter of naming things. In this case, bend is not something you ever want a door to do. Well, maybe you do. I don't know. I guess if you want to have someone knock a door down, you could keep that, but you can actually hide that and say, okay, well, I don't want this. I'm going to hide the bend and the side because that also is useless. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to right click over here in parameters pane and go to edit mode, and that allows me to select multiples. I can control click or shift click if I want to select that, right? So I'm going to select the ones I want to hide, and that's going to be the bend and side. And first thing I want to do is I actually want to lock them so that they never do anything. And then I can just go to hidden and hide selected properties. And now the average user, when they come in here, they're going to see open, close, right, and scale and whatever. But you can hide everything that you don't want them to use. So now you have a functioning wall with the door. So by default, what this is my slider here is a 1-to-1. So every, this is 22 degrees. I've rotated it. But you can actually go in and it goes all the way to 90. But you can go in and create a new property, and you can animate this however you want with the timeline here, right? So I can go in and say, okay, at 0 it's not open, and maybe at 30 it's all the way open. So let's say I wanted, for some reason, let's say I wanted to have a slider that I create that actually cycles through the door, opening and closing as I'm moving across, right? So here I've got the door position here, but maybe, here I'll just pick some random number.
Does it keyframe any properties?
It auto keys, yep. So here I've got this animation that the door is kind of waving around and everything, and then it gets open, right? And then I can actually take this and how you do this, I'm going to hope this works because, you know, we'll see what happens. You can right click in here and be in edit mode in the parameters pane. And then you can do, if you right click on a property that's in there and go to ERC freeze. The name is kind of weird if you haven't been in our industry, but ERC freeze, and then I'm going to create a new property. And so I'm going to just call this animation just for kicks right now. And for path, I'm just going to, I don't know, it'll go under transforms here. You can go wherever you want it to go. I'll put it under rotation. And then I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to set my range 0 to 1 and then create that property. And then I'll click this button, keyed, and it's going to be based on the animation timeline here. And then click accept. And if it's worked right, now I've got an animation that's doing exactly what the timeline did, right? And it's a 0 to 100%. So you can go and capture animation, set it up like that. We don't have an interactive mode where, say, you know, once, you know, somebody steps on a plate, then now the door opens, or that kind of stuff like a game would have. But you can go and put animations into these properties like this. I could even go and take Genesis 3 male and animate him, you know, in different poses, or even do a walk cycle, animate a walk cycle in the timeline, and then go and create a property on him that is the walk. So then they could go and just run through this, and it would have the walk cycle apply. Any animation can be converted into an animatable property like that. Yeah, we do have cameras in here, and you can animate those. So there are multiple ways to do that, but in here you just go to create a camera. There we go, and then got my camera selected, and then now that my camera is selected here, it's going to animate based on the time as well. So now I've got my camera animating, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing, I guess. But there we go.
So we're seeing from the camera's point of view.
Yep. So, and then again, also we had the door animation. Let's see, where did I put that? Under rotation? Oh, that was on the door. So we can go and animate this based on time as well. And now we've got, yeah, all your animations going at the same time. That's kind of an introduction to how you can set up content to work in Dev Studio.